All right, could a 500-year-old text by Machiavelli actually hold the secret to modern corporate takeovers and cyber hacks? I know, it sounds a little wild, but if we dig into Chapter 4 of The Prince, it actually reveals this incredibly universal rule about power. So in this explainer, we're going to look at his structural analysis of how power actually transfers, because, as you'll see, it totally determines whether a conquest, whether that's in business, computing, or geopolitics, simply replaces a system or just completely destroys it.
Looking at the source material, Machiavelli anchors his entire theory on this massive, almost baffling historical puzzle, and that is Alexander the Great. When Alexander completely took over the sprawling Persian Empire, logic basically dictates that it should have fractured into 1,000 bloody rebellions. I mean, think about the sheer scale of this for a second. You have a foreign conqueror sweeping into a massive, established civilization. The very second King Darius was defeated, the empire really should have shattered. But it didn't. The system remained incredibly stable. So Machiavelli's core question here isn't just some dusty ancient history lesson. It's a deep dive into why certain massive systems just roll over easily when leadership changes, while others will literally fight to the bitter end.
Well, Machiavelli traces this all back to structural differences. Think of it kind of like this. Is the system a decentralized, tangled organism that naturally fights off a foreign body? Or is it a highly centralized, switchable machine? This right here is the hidden mechanism at play. The Persian Empire under Darius was already highly centralized. It depended almost entirely on a single authority node at the very top, but beneath that, it was structurally unified with standardized bureaucracies. Because it was basically a switchable machine, when Alexander arrived, he didn't have to rebuild the entire body of the empire. He simply swapped out the top node. Now, if Persia had been a fragmented organism, with strong local autonomy, Alexander's victory would have just been the start of a grueling province-by-province war.
So this dynamic creates an almost inevitable feedback loop for any conqueror. Let's look at the steps. Step 1, maintain the tax flow. Basically, keep the money moving. Do that and you immediately trigger Step 2, elite cooperation. The local administrators, or, in today's terms, the VPs and middle managers, they realize their bonuses are safe. And let's be real here, middle management will survive just about any apocalypse, as long as the direct deposits keep clearing. This naturally leads right into Step 3, population compliance. The general public usually just wants their daily lives to continue uninterrupted. You combine all three of those and boom, you reach Step 4, rapid systemic stabilization. You've essentially hijacked the entire machine just by making sure the engine keeps running. Now, the psychological underlayer driving all of this is absolutely fascinating. It's called the authority substitution effect. We really love to romanticize the idea that populations are fiercely loyal to their specific leaders. But Machiavelli's text implies a much darker truth. People are mostly just loyal to functional predictability. When a centralized system of order is captured completely intact, humans actually have this remarkable psychological tendency to just reassign legitimacy to the new person holding the reins. Actually, scratch that. It's more like, as long as the trash gets picked up, the payroll clears, and the streets are safe, the vast majority of people are going to accept that substitution of authority with surprisingly little friction.
Which brings us right to administrative continuity bias. Think about the bureaucrats and the managers for a second here. Their survival is entirely tied to the system itself, right? Not the face at the top of the org chart. They prioritize operational stability way over the identity of the ruler. Imagine a massive corporation gets bought out and the CEO gets fired. But the VP structure stays exactly the same, with the exact same bonus structure. Those directors are going to pivot their loyalty to the new board almost overnight. It's not a betrayal, really. It's just a totally rational adaptation to keep things running smoothly.
And what's honestly brilliant is how this ancient Persian blueprint transfers directly across modern domains. Inheriting an intact structure basically means you inherit the system's behavior. Take financial trading systems. A centralized empire here is kind of like a single dominant market regime. A sudden leadership change rarely disrupts the trend as long as the market structure itself isn't broken. Or think about chess. If you have a highly coordinated structure protecting the king, and somehow the identity of the king changed but all the pieces stayed perfectly intact, the board's evaluation barely shifts. The structure matters way more than the individual piece. We see the exact same thing in cybersecurity with monolithic architectures. If a hacker gets admin access, they don't need to rewrite the back-end code, right? They just inherit all the system's capabilities. And of course, in military strategy, a highly centralized command makes a decapitation strategy incredibly, brutally effective.
So, reading through Machiavelli's analysis, this universal rule really starts to emerge, the decapitation stability model. He argues that the more centralized any system is, the more vulnerable it becomes to a seamless leadership replacement at the very top. It's a massive paradox of power. We so often view highly centralized systems as strong and totally impenetrable. But from a takeover perspective, they are incredibly brittle right at the apex. Controlling that top node literally equals controlling the entire system. You don't have to fight 1,000 small battles, you really just have to win one big one. Systems like this will fiercely resist disruption from the bottom up, but they are uniquely, dangerously vulnerable to top-down replacement.
Of course, we absolutely have to apply a ruthless critique to this 500-year-old framework, because the model definitely has failure conditions today. Machiavelli kind of suffers from a bit of survivorship bias here. He highlights successful transitions while underrepresenting the cases that led to grinding, chaotic fragmentation. One major modern blind spot is his assumption that administrative systems just stayed totally neutral. In today's highly identity-based societies, that is rarely true. He underestimates how strong local identities and nationalist resistance can cause systems to violently fragment. Plus, back in Alexander's time, controlling the center meant controlling all the information. Today, independent, decentralized communication networks allow local resistance to coordinate super easily. And elite rationality isn't guaranteed either. Under an existential threat, elites will often just panic rather than cooperate. So, while this model works flawlessly in pure bureaucracies, it absolutely hits a brick wall in highly ideological or networked societies.
So according to this whole framework, what is the collapse threshold? Like, how do these systems actually break down? Well, the source suggests the system shatters when two things happen simultaneously. First, administrative continuity is violently interrupted. This means the taxes stop, logistics fail, and standard operating procedures are just completely thrown out the window. Second, provincial nodes, like your middle managers, local governors, or regional servers, gain independent power. When you're analyzing how a centralized monopoly breaks, the theory shows it is not just about removing the CEO. It's about what happens when administrative authority fragments, logistical continuity is disrupted, and local networks suddenly gain autonomy. The very second that bureaucracy breaks, the empire fragments immediately.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a really close look at your own company, your industry, or even your digital infrastructure. If the person at the very apex vanished tomorrow, would the system organically adapt and fight to maintain its unique identity? Or is your bureaucracy so perfectly centralized, so standardized and deeply compliant that a new owner could literally just turn the key and drive away? Centralization creates absolutely incredible efficiency, for sure. But as the text shows us, it also means the whole system might just be a switchable machine waiting for a new operator. Just something to keep in mind the next time you're looking at an org chart.